Greetings everyone. My name is Murtaza Heather. I'm a professor of supply chain and logistics management at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University in Toronto, Ontario. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to a course in research methods. The course is designed about research design, planning and execution, and the first few slides will be the ones in which I will introduce to you to this course. The first important thing that we will discuss is why research matters. Why do we research in the first place? How does it inform the society? How does it inform the academia? And how does it help us build a better economy, a better society? And then, while I'm discussing why research matters, we will also discuss why and how it should be done. And then after a brief introduction of how research should be done, I will introduce you to this course. Now, for informed decision-making, for effective decision-making, it is important that we have the right inputs, right information, right analysis, and in timely analysis for that purpose. And for such decision-making, and that decision-making could be in the public sector for governments, or it could be in the private sector for businesses, or it could be in the academia where we study healthcare, poverty issues, and the like. And then all of this research that we do, both in the public, private, and also in the academia, it informs public policy. It informs the businesses. It involves them to build their strategies. And then what happens is that through this research, we build a platform. It provides us with a platform to debate. In the absence of research, in the absence of research deliverables, what we would have is just hypotheses and no basis to compare our results and have a meaningful debate. And the research moves the debate, in fact, from hypotheses to, in fact, conclusions. It provides us with a common platform where we actually could talk about it, could agree up to disagree, and then move forward. And it helps us to move from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge. So I will begin by basically discussing how research should be conducted. And I think the focus of this course, which is on how research should be conducted using research methods, would be extremely helpful for those who are in academia, especially undergraduate students. This course is more so for the undergraduate students than for graduate students. And then once we know how what research methods are, then we would move forward. But there are some basic rules that one needs to follow. And let me put them out in the very first few minutes of this course. Research should be done honestly. And by honestly, I have the following few rules. One should avoid bias. If you were to say that I believe in something, and then to undertake a research saying, I would prove through this research that what my belief is right, then you are starting off with a biased standpoint, which then leads you to conclude, and those conclusions would basically be proving what you were saying in the first place, what you were believing in the first place. Avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is when you copy someone else's work and then present it as yours without any attribution. It could be accidental, that you didn't know how to quote somebody else's work, or it could be malicious, where you knew that it's not your work and you presented it as yours. That's called plagiarism. An example of this would be that you copy something from an article that you found on the Google or somebody else's assignment, and you copied it and pasted it in your work. That is plagiarism, and it's the highest academic offense one could ever do. Avoid it at all costs. Avoid the conflict of interest. If you are working on a research for, let's say, your term paper, and at the same time you work for a company that provided you with the data, then there's a conflict of interest, because you would not be an unbiased researcher where you are free to conclude whatever you would like to. And even though if you are, the very perception of conflict of interest is equally damaging as having a real conflict of interest. And of course, avoid falsifying results. If your results do not support your hypothesis, there's nothing wrong with it. You can conclude that your hypothesis was not supported. You don't have to falsify it, avoid it at all costs. And then use the appropriate tools. And Appropriate Tools is a very comprehensive set of software, hardware, books, journal articles. You have to apply and employ the right tools to get the results that you really want. And finally, avoid pirated software. And the way I see it is you cannot use pirated software for doing good quality research. If the software is pirated, you have a very compromised position to start with. And the very honesty, the very ethics of your research is compromised from the word go. So let me say it again. No pirated software, no bias, avoid plagiarism, avoid conflict of interest, and avoid at all costs falsifying results, and then use the right set of tools to move forward. If you have this approach, I can guarantee you will be an excellent researcher. Now, what are the topics? I honestly believe that if you are interested in learning how to fly a plane, you really need to see how a plane first flies. If you want to drive a car and learn how to drive a car, you have to see how cars operate on the road. And having the same methodology, same philosophy, my way of teaching statistics is to actually take you to the end of the process, and the end of the process is the deliverable. It's that report, it's that thesis, it's that PhD dissertation, it's that commercial report, it's that feasibility report. If you are working for the Ministry of Environment, a feasibility report of some industry, environmental pollution levels in some part of the city. If you work for a consumer behavior market research firm, it is basically a report on the analysis of market trends. You talk to consumers and then you tabulate a model or you parameterize a model. At the end of the day, there is a report that you need to write. And the purpose for statistics is to provide you with the evidence, the information, the material that you really need to write that report. So that deliverable has to be thought in advance, has to be envisioned and visualized in advance. What kind of a report, what kind of a thesis, what kind of a term paper that is about to be written, and that is to be the final deliverable of your research project, and therefore we would first look at that deliverable. Instead of telling you what the mean, modes, and correlations are and talking about probability distributions, let us first see how all this information comes together in one report and then move on from there. Now, in terms of deliverable, when you're writing a report and preparing a report and you're undertaking an analysis, you really need some tools to work with. Gone are the days that you would do a statistics course using just a calculator and do some hands calculations by your hand. Nowadays, the data are so extensive, so large, that calculators, even small computers, are not feasible, are not sufficient to do good data analysis. Data are now running into gigabytes. If you work for a bank and the bank has got a few 100 million transactions, you certainly cannot anticipate doing all of this on a calculator or even on a small computer. You really need powerful machines, and you really need stable and powerful software. So the first thing you need in a report writing, you need a word processor. Right? Microsoft Word, for instance, is the most commonly used product in the market. And now here is my own take on it. I think there's enough freeware in the market, that is the software that you can acquire and use without paying any money, that you should be thinking of rather than paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for commercially available software. So in terms of word processor, you certainly have the option of using Microsoft Office, and I would encourage you to use it if you have a licensed copy of it. Or otherwise, you can actually you have two good options, alternatives available to you. One is the Open Office, which is very similar to Microsoft Office that you can download from Sun Microsystems, and that software is freely available and can do all of the word processing and spreadsheeting and PowerPoint presentations that you would like to do. Google, on the other hand, also offers an online system of Google Docs where you can have freeware available that you can use, but you need good, reliable internet connection to use Google Docs. It has a word processor, it has spreadsheet, it has PowerPoint software, it even has an online survey questionnaire designed to. So the first thing I mentioned is the word processor. That's where you bring in all the material and write your report. Also you need is a spreadsheet, sheet software, and usually it's Microsoft Excel, or as I mentioned, you can use the OpenOffice and other freeware alternatives. The spreadsheet allows you to actually create tables, even analyze them, but also you can create attractive, more visually appealing graphics that reveal the hidden trends that sometimes are not available, not visible, readily visible through tables. So sometimes tables are made, they are hiding the trends, and graphics explain the point. The statistical software that you would need to use for this course is called R. R is a freeware, and a freeware, again, is a software that you can use legally for free. It's a very powerful computing environment. It is as powerful as, one would arguably as powerful as MATLAB, for those of you who are intellectually inclined, and it certainly has much more capacity and capabilities than the commercially available software such as SPSS that most people use in social sciences. Now, there are a whole host of statistical software, econometric software that you can use. I personally, for my research, use Stata and R, but then there is SAS and SPSS and LINDEP and eViews, and there's a big market out there. The challenge is to use the appropriate software that is capable for all your research needs, but also that is flexible. As you grow as a researcher and your needs to do advanced research grow, the software should be able to grow with you. Now, some of you who have prior experience doing some statistical analysis using Excel would be inclined to use Excel for that purpose, and I don't stop you. I wouldn't stop you from doing that. You're free to use it. However, Excel is not a very flexible environment to do research, and hardcore research requires very powerful software tools. There are so many algorithms that are not coded in Excel, and you'll be at a loss, even in this intermediate, or I would say basic course in research methods, where Excel would not be able to offer you the algorithm. For example, you cannot run a binary logic or a multinomial logic model. And if these words sound alien to you at this stage, no need to worry. By the end of this course, you will be using these methods readily, freely, and more. And I honestly believe that you'll be using it efficiently as well. So I would explain later in the course what are the key motivations for me to offer this course in R. But very briefly, number one motivation is it's free. You can be a legal user of the software. Secondly, it's very powerful. And thirdly, there are a few thousand researchers, academics, professors all around the world, from New Zealand to America to Canada, who are developing this software day in and day out. And you really need to be at the cutting edge of the statistical technology, and R provides you with that environment. And more importantly, R has become very user-friendly in the recent past. You also need to have a note-taking mechanism. A note-taking mechanism is when you read a paper, a research paper, which is a journal article, or it could be a newspaper article, or it could be a website. You need to archive that information so that it is readily available to you. And there are a few software out there that do this job for you. Commercially available software are called Reference Manager and then Note. And there's a freeware for this as well. It's called Zotero, and it works with Microsoft. It works with one of the internet browsers. So as we progress in this course and we move forward, I will be illustrating these very concepts in detail, step by step, so that you have a hands-on experience, and you can actually see how these technologies are used and how they are used in the industry. And then once you are familiar with the tools, the next step is the report writing and organization. Once you have the results, once you've done the analysis, you have the results, and you're ready to move on, then you write the report. And then in this course, I will focus on how reports are written and what you really need to write those reports, and how do you organize a report. And there will be a lecture on that. Then I will discuss in detail what research methodology is and what do we mean by it. And I will have a very detailed discussion about it in one of the courses. Then from moving from, and remember this was, I first introduced the deliverable, the final product. And then once I have shown you the final product, I will then move to the fundamentals of research methodology or the data analysis, the fundamentals of data analysis. The first step in data analysis is to understand how many types of data are there. How do you collect data? What types of data are out there, and how each and every different type of data are collected. What do we mean by sampling? How do we collect information from a sample coming out of a very large population? For instance, if you are interested in finding out how many students who are pursuing a PhD in America or in Canada, how many of those are doing a PhD in social sciences, and of those who are doing PhDs in social sciences, how many of those are working on macroeconomics? The population of such a student body is in thousands, but you simply cannot interview each and every student doing a PhD dissertation in macroeconomics. So you have to design, draw a sample from that large population. We will discuss in detail how the sampling is done. Once we have discussed the data types and sampling, we would move into data structures, and then from there into data sources. There are primarily two types of data: the primary data sets and the secondary data sets. The primary data set is basically data that you collect about individuals if you are working with human subjects. And secondary data would be if somebody else has collected data, but it is available on an aggregate basis. Instead of being available at the individual level, it's probably available at the neighborhood level. And I will discuss that in detail once we reach this milestone in our course. From data collection and sampling, we will move to a very interesting topic, which is data dictionaries. And the data dictionaries are metadata. This is the data. This is the database of the database. This is the information about the data. And I will show you why it is extremely important that you create a data dictionary where you explain what each variable stands for, how the data was collected for that particular variable, and what type of data that is collected or is captured in that variable, and what values are null, what values are credible, and if there is a portion of that variable in the sample that is not usable. All of this information is available in the data dictionary. In sampling, as I mentioned, I will have a detailed discussion, most probably a full lecture on sampling, where we will discuss data collection issues, design of surveys, questionnaire design. How would you design a questionnaire and solicit information about it? How do you test or pre-test a survey instrument or a questionnaire, and then again ending up with data dictionaries. After we have discussed what data are, how they are collected, what types of data exist, we will begin a discussion of the basic data analysis. And the first step in data analysis is descriptive analysis, where one measures the central tendency in the data set. Measures of central tendency are already known to some of you. It is a common practice that one uses these terms such as average, or on average, it takes me 45 minutes to go to work. The average rainfall is 15 millimeters or the like. So we have this tendency to use these words, but there is a science, there is a method behind it. And these the tendency or the central tendencies are averages, how do you compute means, modes and medians, and what are these? And then a graphical representation of data, such as creating histograms and the like. These will be discussed in great detail in our lecture on descriptive analysis. And again, remember that all of this would be hands-on, and I will be displaying this as a form of experiential learning in R, where we will take a data set and we will analyze it in great detail. Once we have done the descriptive statistics, we will move into analytic graphics. And the analytic graphics are basically the same graphics that we use, but then R and other statistical software have very strong, capable, built-in algorithms that can take a very complex data set and then present the analysis and the results in graphical format. And those images, those graphs, are really illustrated, and you can really learn a lot from those graphics. Then after discussing the graphic distributions or analytic graphics, we will move into probability distribution, and that's where this course will become a little bit more involved, a little bit more serious, and there is requirements for a little bit higher degree of empirical inclination required. We will discuss what probability distributions are, and the most commonly used distributions, such as the normal distribution or t-distribution, and we will discuss those in great detail and how those distributions came about and how can one use those in analytics to be discussed. Following that would be the discussion about hypothesis testing. And most of statistics, most of applied statistics in social sciences, that is business, psychology, education, political science, is about hypothesis testing. And to give you an example of hypothesis testing, you may have a hypothesis is there a correlation between fuel prices and the price of sugar in the retail market? And you want to test this hypothesis that as the fuel prices increase, so does the price of sugar in the retail market. And you can, if you have the data, test such hypothesis. Or you can compare two different groups. For instance, your hypothesis could be that men are heavier than women, and then you could collect a data set and weight for both men and women from a sample. You draw a random sample, and again, random sample, what does it mean, how do you collect it? We'll discuss this in sampling. So you draw a random sample of men and women, and once you have drawn a random sample of men and women, you collect information about their age, their height and weight, and then you test this hypothesis if men are heavier than women or not. And that's where most of the work in social science is done, and that is the hypothesis testing. From there, we'll move into the workhorse of regression, of statistics, which is regression analysis. And when I say it's a workhorse of statistics, it is the technique that is most widely used in statistical analysis. And we will use regression analysis in great detail, and I think I would devote a few lectures on the theory, the application, the influence of how do you estimate a regression model. And once you've done it, once you've parameterized the model, how do you draw inferences from your model? We will do all this in great detail in the lectures on regression analysis. Now, going back to the final deliverable. Every research project, as I mentioned, assignment, term paper, professional reporting, has a final deliverable of an analytical exercise. And the way I see it, before you begin your work, your research, your statistical analysis, you have to think very clearly of the final deliverable. You have to really visualize how your report would look like, even before you have started your research. And here are some of the key analysis considerations. You have to first ask yourself, what is the research question? What are you trying to determine? Is there more than one question? Is there just one question? And once you have qualified, and once you have finalized your research questions, then you have to ask the next question to yourself. And that question is, how have others analyzed the same or similar problems in the past? And this is called literature review. That is, you are studying and you are reading about the research done by others about the same problem that you are studying. And the reason for doing this is because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You do not want to do the same research that somebody else has done, because that would be a waste of time and effort. And then the literature review actually allows you to learn from others' experiences and also to identify niche and gaps in the previous research. If you're able to learn that there is a gap, somebody has studied a research problem, but they have studied it annually, they have not looked at monthly variations or weekly variations, then there's a niche for you to actually go and explore and study the same problem but on a very different frequency. And that is the very purpose of literature review, to learn from the experience of others and to identify research gaps. And then from there onwards, you move into this, when you're reviewing others' research, you see what techniques, what statistical methods, what econometric models they use, and can you actually use one of those techniques, or can you use even a better technique? If someone has used an inappropriate technique, can you use the right one and find answers to the problem that you are studying? Then comes the question, you know the question that you are interested in. You know what others have done and how others have done their research in the past. You also know how and what methods were used in the past. Now it's your turn to figure out what information you need to answer the questions in your research. And you need to figure out what data are readily available, or what data could be collected in a reasonable amount of time, spending a reasonable amount of effort. If a data set could be collected in 5 years, whereas your term paper is due in 2 weeks, obviously that's not a viable alternative. If a data set could be collected in a year and a half, but your master's runs out in 6 weeks or 6 months, again, it's not a viable alternative. So what you have to determine is to figure out if there are data readily available, if someone else has collected the data set that you can readily use, and if not, can you collect that data in a reasonable amount of time and using a reasonable amount of effort. And effort means cost. It may cost you money, it may cost you wages, it may cost you time. And then, once you've done that, you also have to ask yourself, you know the question that you're researching, but what are the answers that are needed? Right? What answers should come out of your data analysis? And you need to think about it in the first place. You need to know what are the answers, what are the what is the breadth and depth of analysis that is required to satisfy the readers and your peers for them to say, okay, this question has been analyzed, this research is sufficient, now it makes sense to us all. And then you also have to think of what type of narrative would accompany the analysis. A narrative means what kind of a writing style would you adopt? Will it be a very formal, academic, dry way of writing? Or would you be writing it for a newspaper? Or would you be writing it for a blog? Or would you be writing it for a term paper for your class where the writing style is different? You have to think of this in advance. And when I say narrative, it's not just the writing style, but it's APA or MLA. That is specific writing styles in terms of how do you refer to other information, should you use a comma or not. So all these things have to be thought in the first place. How do you report it and what kind of style guidelines you would have to use. And then you need to know in advance what would be the shape and structure of your report. Right? Would your report be just 10 pages long? Or would your report be 20 pages long? Is it the massive thesis which is supposed to be 50 pages or 100 pages? Or is it a PhD dissertation that has to run 150 to 200 pages? Now, brevity is a virtue. Some very important PhD theses have been written in using fewer than 50 words. And in fact, if you were to visit Princeton University's website, you can get a copy of John Nash's thesis, which was his PhD dissertation, in which he solved the Nash equilibrium problem. And I think that dissertation runs into 35 pages. That's a PhD dissertation that solves a problem in 35 pages. So you really don't have to write 500 pages, even if it's a PhD dissertation. You only write as much as it's needed, not a word more and not a word less. Now, if you were to pay attention to what I've just said, think about the question in advance, think of the tools and information you need, think of how you report the research, what methods you have to use. I'm fairly confident that research methods could be taught easily and research methods could be learned easily. So, again, the bottom line is that before you start your research, think of the final deliverable, the report, the thesis, the dissertation you have to prepare, and then use the appropriate techniques, methods, and tools accordingly. The tradition is, in academia at least, and the purpose of these lectures is to help students do their research. And therefore we are focusing on the structure, report structures in typical academic environments. A typical university level research report should have the following outline. You start with the cover page, and the cover page has your name and your student number, and the course you're taking, and the professor's name, if it's a master's or a PhD dissertation, the university guidelines are very strict as to what goes in the cover page. You must always have a table of contents. A table of contents that gives an outline of what topics we covered and the page numbers there. A table of contents will also have a list of tables and a list of figures and a list of any other illustrations in the very beginning of the report. Any paper report that does not have a table of contents is a very difficult book to read. It's like going out on a journey without a map in your hand. You really need a table of contents. Once you have a table of contents, the first real part of the report is the abstract. An abstract is usually 250 to 300 words that summarizes the entire effort. Now, it may take you 5 years to do a PhD, but your abstract is 250 words. That's half a page. Right? It may take you a month and a half to write your term paper, but your abstract is 250 words, no more. And that abstract basically introduces the research that you've done, how you have done it, what are the key findings, and so on and so forth. Very brief, very to the point. After the abstract, you start with the introduction of the research problem. That's where you actually introduce the problem. Why are you doing it? What benefits the society can get from that research? How others have done it? And I'll briefly touch on that. But basically, what you do is follow the introduction with a literature review, and that's where you discuss in detail how others have researched the same problem. Following the literature review, the next step is methodology. And methodology is basically where you discuss how data are collected, what research methods would you use, what type of results would you draw, and how would you report those results. After the research methodology section, you start writing the results. You've already done your analytics, you've done the statistical modeling, or whatever simulations that needed to be done, and then in the section on reports from analytics, you basically do the report writing and report the results. Following that, you discuss your results. You say, here's, in the last section, we reported our results, and here's how those inferences could be drawn. And then finally, you can write a section on conclusions. You conclude, basically, you take the results and the discussion, and you draw some conclusions from there. The last few sections are the references, the academic papers and others that we cited in the report go into references, and then we have the appendices and acknowledgements, and that's pretty much it. This is a standard deliverable structure. And this course here that we are using, we are focusing in this course primarily on data collection, research methods, and analysis. And the reason I have built this preamble for the methodology and data collection and research methods is because without this preamble, you would not really know where the data analysis and research methods really fit in the big picture. So the big picture is the report that looks like this on your screen, and all these cover pages and table of contents and abstracts and so on and so forth. You really need to know how this report is organized, and in order to get to the last page of your report where you write the section on references, you really need to know how you begin, how you end, and how the research is done, and how the analytics will help you get to the very last stage of your research. There is a very highly regarded academic journal called Transport Policy, and they have a guideline for authors, and those authors are professors and practitioners and also some senior students, and those guidelines are, that checklist is basically out there to help you understand what you should be reporting in your paper. And that checklist is available at the Transport Policy's website that we have produced here for you. The first thing they ask you is, have you told your readers from the very beginning what they might gain by reading your paper? Right? From the very onset of your research, from the very onset of your research paper, you have to tell your readers, if you were to read this paper, you will learn the following. And that's the introductory part. Then, have you made the aim of your work clear? Have you told your readers that I was doing this research, the purpose of this research, for instance, is to analyze, and then you explain what you wanted to analyze. That was the aim of your research. The next checklist, have you explained the significance of your contributions? If you have found something new, something significant, something substantial, you need to communicate your findings to your peers in your paper. You can be humble, but that you really have to explicitly indicate and communicate to your peers what you have discovered and the significance you're finding. If you have discovered oil and you've discovered billions and billions of barrels of oil somewhere, you simply cannot say, we may have found something useful. You really have to come out and say, we have discovered billions of barrels of oil. And that's how you actually communicate whatever the findings you have. And they were really significant findings. You have to be explicit about it. And then finally, not finally, but moving on, you explain, have you set your work in an appropriate context by giving sufficient background, including a complete set of relevant references to your work. What it means is, have you told your readers what other researchers have done about the same or similar problem in the past? And that's the literature review section that we discussed earlier. And then have you addressed the question of a particularity and usefulness? And that's very key, because research is done in an environment where resources are highly desirable and the resources are really tight. Funds are tight, research funds are rare, your time is valuable, your professor's time is valuable. So you have to really think in advance that the problem you're studying, is it worth studying? Right? What is the usefulness of doing this research? How will the society in general benefit from this research? And that has to be a consideration at the back of your mind in the very beginning. And then, have you identified future developments that may result from your work? If you have discovered something, if there's an innovation on your part, you have to explain how that innovation would change technology, or if there's a procedural innovation, how would it change the practice of a certain profession in the future? And lastly, and finally, have you structured your paper in a clear and logical fashion? If the paper is organized in a fashion that is easily understandable, and it is following a logical order so that the reader is able to expect what would come next. So with this, I conclude the very introduction of this course. So let's now formally see what do we really mean by research methods. And here I will offer a very, in layman or layperson's term, what research methods are. Research methods, in my view, are a systematic way to analyze a research question, and in the process, we determine the following. We need to know what questions need to be answered. And that is a fundamental thing that you address under any research methodology. What are the questions? What are the research problems that you need to address? Then, what information is required, what data sets, what papers, what articles, what newspapers, what archives, what video footings, what is required to answer the question for which you are seeking an answer. And then, you need to know if that information is available in a library. How will you access that information? Do you have access to those archives? Do you have access to those materials that are required to answer the question that you're interested in? Often there are data available with the government or with private enterprise for which you have to make formal requests, data requests, that I am interested in determining some problems, answers to some questions, and I would appreciate access to such and such data sets. You have to first identify those data sets and make a formal request with those who are holding that data, that could be the government, or that could also be the private enterprise businesses, and then you seek access. Once you have that access, and once you have got that information, then you need to figure out how would you analyze that information. And in cases where that information is not readily available, then you need to devise a strategy to collect data, and that's what we call conducting surveys. Either you conduct your own survey, or you have access to some existing data, somebody else has collected it and made that data available to you. Your challenge then becomes, is that how would you analyze that information? What research tools would you take? Would that be an econometric study? Would that be a simulation? Would that just be a tabulation of averages and a simple analysis? Or would simple correlation structure analysis would be sufficient? All that has to be decided and finalized in advance of actually proceeding with that research. And then once you have analyzed your data sets, you need to know how that information will be presented and shared with the larger community. Your peers, if you are students, if your peers, if you are faculty member, then other faculty, and if you are an academic, your other colleagues, if you are to share this information as a research paper, as a working paper, how would you do that? How would you write it? How would you disseminate it? And to seek feedback from others. So the society in general, the community would be the people, the government, and the businesses, and your research should have some benefit to those. Right? The research could not be just totally abstract. It has to have a benefit for the society. And again, the way I describe society is it could be people, government, or the businesses. So this is in a nutshell what research methods is. Right? A systematic way to analyze a research question by addressing these concerns that I have just highlighted. Research takes a lot of planning. And in planning, I mean you have to focus on initial research. And that is the research you do before you conduct your own real research. And the initial research is basically identifying and clarifying the research question. If you have a research question, you really need to first clarify and you need to be certain what is exactly what you would like to research. You have to scope this out. Are you going to study the entire population or just a sample? Would you be studying something in the mornings only or in the evenings only? You really have to scope out the problem, and that you have to do by doing some initial research. You have to develop some hypothesis. Right? Remember that example that I gave you, are men heavier than women? You really have to develop the hypothesis and say, well, my hypothesis is, I believe, that men are heavier than women. But then the scoping comes out into play. And somebody would say, well, really, if men are really heavier than women, if you look at babies, right, toddlers, between, say, 12-month-old babies, if the 12-month-old babies are there in front of you, half of them are boys and half of them are girls. Are boys really heavier than girls, right? So scoping means that you say, no, I'm not interested in toddlers. Actually, I'm interested in adults. And adults between the ages of, and then you scope out the problem by saying adults between the ages of 25 and 45, right? And then you say, well, really, it's not adults everywhere in the world. I'm particularly interested in finding the average difference in weight of men and women in South Asia. And within South Asia, I'm not really interested in the southern populations. I'm looking at the northern subcontinent populations. Right? All of this has to happen before you go out and start measuring weights and heights and ages. You really have to scope the problem out in the beginning. And that's called initial research. Right? Now, the very first step after you have completed your initial research is writing a research proposal. And a research proposal is basically where you put down your initial thoughts in a rather systematic way, and it has the same structure or a very similar structure as would be of your final deliverable. And it has a literature review where you actually study what others have done, and based on identifying the niche, the gap, you define your particular contribution and the way you would do the analysis. You would define or state your hypothesis. You will actually express or describe a research methodology, and you will also explain how would you do this research in terms of the scheduling. Will it take you 3 months to do this, 6 months to do it? And in real actual research, you have to come up with a budget as well. How much will it cost, or what time period to do that type of research? So that is all. That is the literature review, the stating of hypothesis, the research methodology, scheduling, as well as budgeting. This is all part of the research proposal. And then comes the stage of research execution. Let's say you submitted a proposal to a granting agency, or you submitted a proposal to your faculty professor, and they accepted the proposal, and then you go about doing the research. If you're collecting information, you finalize the survey instrument, the questionnaire. You do the pre-testing. You take the questionnaire and then you pre-test it by executing it, say, on a 10% sample of your sample, or you actually give it to people who are familiar with the research topic and you test the instrument to see if there are any problems with it. Once you have done the survey questionnaires pre-testing, you actually go about and do the actual survey, you execute the survey, and then you collect the data sets, you create a database, and you archive the data in a proper format, put it in a software such as SPSS, R, or Stata, or SAS, and then you start by data cleaning. You identify data that are not representative, or there is error in their measurement, and after you've done the data cleaning, you proceed with data analysis. Once you finish the data analysis, you write the report, or the term paper, or the dissertation, and that would be a completion of your research. So this basically concludes our discussion on research methodology. My next lecture would actually present a case study where we have gone through the entire process of identifying a research problem, identifying a research question, identifying a research methodology, conducting a literature review, and then actually going out and collecting data from a small sample of households, and then creating first the database, then performing the data analysis, and then writing the report. And this would be presented in our next lecture, where we'll present you a case study of how this is operationalized. And then once we have done this, we will begin our sections on research or data analysis and the like. So let's see what the next lecture holds for us.